Hello, Diocese of the Rio Grande. It's that time again. Here's your weekly update for the third week of September 2020. In this weekly update, we're going to be bringing you a congregational update about the financial situation that is happening in our congregations in the Diocese of the Rio Grande. I want to talk a little bit about this election that's coming up. And I want to talk about the difference between sympathy and empathy, and particularly emphasize our spiritual practice of empathy in these polarizing times. We all know that the coronavirus is not just a healthcare crisis. It is also an economic crisis. And the impact of that economic crisis we have been feeling throughout the church, not just here in the Diocese of the Rio Grande, but all over. As individuals' personal incomes are uncertain, so too is their giving to the church and the church's need to increase our giving to those in need in our neighborhoods and in our communities. So far in the Diocese of the Rio Grande, we're mostly holding our own. The payroll protection program really helped us out and helped us get through the summer, both in terms of the diocesan budget and in terms of the congregations. But as we hit the end of the summer, we have started to see a bit of a decline, and in our biweekly treasurers meetings, I'm starting to hear some more concern about how are we going to make it through this year, and what about pledging for next year. A partial response to next year is the wonderful work that Canon Lee Curtis is doing, providing a diocesan stewardship framework to be used by every congregation that wants to in this fall stewardship season. Many of our congregations have been able to cut their expenses, but many have had to increase their expenses in order to help people out around the edges. Our clergy still need to be paid, our buildings still need to be kept up. We've also had increased expenses like the equipment we're using to broadcast the Sunday liturgy, and the increased giving that our congregations are doing in the community. I want to thank all of you who have continued to give, even if you haven't had much to give, but you've been able to give a little bit. I want to thank you. And those of you whose income has held pretty steady, those of you whose jobs and income has held pretty steady during this pandemic, thank you for increasing your gifts. As I say, most of our congregations are kind of holding steady for now, but there is growing concern about the future. We have a couple of congregations that are really in a tough spot right now. And I want to walk you through what the diocese is doing to help support congregations in this financial and COVID crisis, and how you may have an opportunity to help them out. The first thing is, we have created a financial crisis response team that is led by Canon Lee Curtis and also includes some talented lay people from our diocese who are really good business folks, and they're able to help our congregations if there are budget cuts that can be made. And they also have stewardship expertise about are there ways that we can increase income in order to be able to make sure our congregations can pay their bills. So the first step is, when we're aware that a congregation is struggling financially, we send in the Congregational Crisis Response Team, and that has been tremendously helpful. The second thing we do is to help congregations make the transition into online ministry and online giving. We have found that both of those things have been extremely helpful in helping our congregations stabilize. But there are some congregations that are still struggling. If a congregation in the Diocese of the Rio Grande is not able to stabilize its financial situation because of COVID, we may need to help get them through. And the way I'm thinking about that is, instead of putting into our diocesan budget a kind of large fund for congregational support that then each year we have people applying for grants about, instead, our strategy for how we will work financially with our congregations is we want to help those congregations stand on their own 2 feet. And thus, we put in place these diocesan support structures to help that congregation not be increasingly reliant on diocesan funds from the diocesan budget, but rather to help each congregation figure out what financial stability looks like for them and to figure out a way to maintain that for the long haul. Due to COVID, we have a couple of congregations that may be really struggling even to make it through the end of the year. If our efforts to help them are not sufficient, we may be coming to you, I may be coming to you, to ask if it's possible for you to help us get a congregation to the end of the year. We all know that this COVID crisis will abate eventually, and we will be able to enter into the new normal. But for those congregations that are really struggling and are not able to make it themselves, instead of increasing our diocesan budget, we're going to be coming around and asking, can you, the individual Episcopalians who are watching this video, contribute to help this congregation or that one make it through the year?
You should come up here.
The election is only 6 weeks away, and I know you know that because you're hearing what I'm hearing. This huge polarizing thing. Worries about what's going to happen on election day, what's going to happen after election day. Will the country hold together? Will there be violence in the streets? Will people accept the electoral results? It's all very distressing. So I want to say a couple of things about the church's role in these polarizing times. The first is this: the Episcopal Church and the Diocese of the Rio Grande and myself and your priests are not partisan political operatives. We are not here to tell you to vote for this party or that party. We can't do it under the Constitution, and we wouldn't want to anyway. That's not our job. Our job as religious leaders, as faith leaders, is to speak to the moral realities of the world that we are living in, to preach the gospel. And what Jesus said was not just sort of fairy tale fantasy land for you to think about. Jesus' teaching was about the way we live in this world and how we love our neighbor and how we do justice to people. So you can be expecting to hear from me and from the pulpit of your local church moral messages, but not partisan political messages in this season. I also want to say to you that I believe it is your moral responsibility as a citizen of the United States of America to vote and to participate in the electoral process and perhaps to hold elected office in your community. The leadership of our communities, our towns, our state, and our nation, that leadership and the direction we go in matters. And our participation in that also matters. So please don't sit this one out. Whoever you're going to vote for, make sure you vote. However you're going to vote, make sure you vote. And about that voting thing, because of COVID-19, there's been lots of stuff in the press about voting and how to do it and is it going to be a problem, etc. So our Episcopal Church Office of Government Relations is encouraging you to think about your voting plan beforehand. Normally, I just show up on election day, stand in the line a little bit, do my vote, and get to work. This year, I'm actually thinking differently about how am I going to do that? Where will my polling place be? Will it be open? Should I cast? Would I prefer to cast a mail-in ballot instead? Think about how and when you're going to vote and make sure your vote counts. As we anticipate the vote, we know that because of COVID-19, there will be a lot of ballots that are sent in by mail. And we know that those mail-in ballots take a lot of time to be counted because the systems that are in place to count those mail-in ballots do require double checking and triple checking to make sure that those are actually registered voters who actually voted. And thus, it is important that we know as we approach November, not because of some partisan thing, but because of COVID-19, it may be that we don't have a definitive result of the presidential election for a day or two or maybe even a week. Who knows? The point being, we have got to trust our electoral process and trust the system and not react out of anxiety or fear because some politician says I won or I lost or whatever. We need to instead be prepared for all the votes to be counted and then for us to have a peaceful administration, whoever wins. So, if it takes a while for the ballots to be counted, take a deep breath, spend a lot of time in prayer, Let's not overreact out of polarized angst and anger. Let's remember that we are all in this together, and this country matters to everybody. We have got to build a new future together, all of us. Finally, I want to talk about the difference between empathy and sympathy. And I want to talk about this difference because of the divisions and the polarizations that we are all seeing in the country right now. You know the polarizing influences I'm talking about. You know the fact that neighbors and even members of the same family are not able to have enough agreement to be able to even talk about some of the polarizing issues that we have today. You know about the tragic events like the death of Breonna Taylor. You know about the protests in our streets. You know about the racial divides and the economic injustices that are plaguing us as a people. And you also know about the teachings of Jesus, who said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commands hang all the law and the prophets. So we got to figure out how to love our neighbor when we disagree with our neighbor, when we mistrust our neighbor, when we suspect our neighbor is up to no good. How do we implement and live in a Christian way Jesus' command to love our neighbor in polarizing times like these? Let me give you one, I hope, helpful way of practicing a spiritual discipline called empathizing with those you disagree with. First, let me tell you about the difference between empathy and sympathy, because these two things are often confused, and I want to use those words in a specific way that I think will help you understand what I'm talking about when I mean empathy. The word sympathy means I'm with you, my pain is there, right? So sympathy means I have pain like you have pain, right? So sympathy, a sympathetic comment is something like this. Let's say you got cancer and I am your friend and I'm coming to visit you because you just got this cancer diagnosis. One of the things I might say is, hey, sorry to hear about your cancer. And then I might say something like, my mother had cancer. What I think I'm trying to do is close the distance between me and you by saying I have an experience that's similar to your experience, all right? But the problem is, if I'm the one with the cancer diagnosis, if I'm the one who's in pain here, if I'm the one who's being victimized in this particular moment, I don't believe you are standing here with me, and quite frankly, I don't want to hear about your mother's cancer. Not yet, at least. So what we have to recognize is when there is a disagreement, when there is a gap in experience or understanding between me and another person, sympathy is not the thing that bridges that gap. Sympathy is not the thing that closes that distance. If I, as a white person, say to a person of color, yeah, I understand what it must be like to be you, that's sympathy. And maybe I'm saying that because I have a good heart and I actually mean it. But because of the gap in experience between me as a white, straight man and a person of color, because there's such a big gap in experience between my white experience and the experience of the person I'm talking to, it is unlikely that all the sympathy in the world is going to be received well. In fact, sometimes, often, my well-intended sympathetic comments to say, gosh, these must be hard days for you, is actually something that feels like a slap in the face and increases the distance between us. Because sympathy is only something I can receive well if I've already got an empathy connection with you. So let's talk about empathy. You see, empathy is when I am not just trying to align my experience with you. I'm not trying to even bring my experience into it. Empathy is I am focused on your experience. I am paying attention to your pain. I am listening to your experience. That empathy is the most important thing. Sympathy tries to bring my experience in line with yours. Empathy is like, don't worry about my experience. I'm focused on your experience. And so it is empathy that actually can reach across that gap. It is empathy that, in fact, can reduce that gap. So in these moments, when we all might find ourselves on one side or the other of a polarizing conversation, like, what do you think should happen about the Breonna Taylor situation? Don't start with sympathy, my friends. Start with empathy. Focus on the experience and feelings and needs of the other person that you're talking to. And that takes some spiritual discipline. It also takes some practice, particularly if the things that I'm afraid you're going to say are things that I want to counter in terms of my intellectual argument. Empathy means practicing not just listening to you so I can one-up you in the argument, not just listening to you so I can win the debate, not treating this conversation as one in which I'm uncomfortable, so I want to get out of it, so let me just say things like, I feel your pain and then I'm out. Instead, empathy is the Jesus-level commitment to say, I'm going to stand here with you. Even if I don't understand, even if my experience is different, even if as we start this conversation, I think you're wrong. Still, because of Jesus Christ and my commitment to love you as my neighbor, I'm going to stay here and I'm not going to counter everything you say with my arguments and I'm not going to listen with my experience between me and you. Instead, I'm going to peel back all of my own experience. And as one human being, one human heart to another, I'm going to focus on you and your experience. And I'm going to listen to what you want to say so that I can understand where you are and what you're feeling and what you think. If I truly focus on you and your needs, if I listen not just with my head, but with my heart, if I actually say, I want your experience in my heart, then common ground can open up between us. If you have shared with me your cancer diagnosis, and in my response I have said, tell me how you are. I love you, and this scares me, but I want to hear what you are feeling. I want to know what you need. If I have genuine empathy and care and love for you, if I legitimately want to know what your experience is, and if I can communicate that empathy successfully so that you know that I'm with you in this, human to human, that I care about you and your experience, if I can successfully communicate that empathy, then and only then might you be able to receive my experience of my cancer or my mother's cancer. The greater the divide between me and you when we begin a conversation, the more empathy I need to extend. I need to not wait for you to bring the empathy into the room. I need to bring the empathy myself, because I can't control where you are, but I can control where I am. So my friends, this week and in the weeks to come, when you find yourself in a vigorous disagreement with someone, whether it's in the newspaper or what you see on the news, or a neighbor across the street, or someone wearing a political hat, or someone not wearing a mask, or someone of a different color from you, whatever it is that you find yourself in a polarized situation, remember this: start with empathy. Leave your experience behind. Focus on the experience of the other person. Extend to them your heart and your love. And from there, the Holy Spirit will come in and help bridge the gap and help bring us together. This spiritual practice of empathy is a way of practicing our faith in Jesus Christ, and it is of utmost importance now and in the days ahead. That's your weekly update for this third week of September 2020. Let's keep the faith together, Diocese of the Rio Grande.